Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Wings of Faith Ministries and today's morning coffee and a thought. I hope you have your coffee with you. I've got mine here. Also, we just want to remind you that if you have a prayer request, if you want information, or you want to make a donation, you can do all of that at wingsoffaithministries.ca. This morning, I want to talk about the things we have to deal with in life. Many times in our lives, we draw up all sorts of scenarios on how we believe things are going to turn out. And sometimes things do turn out the way we planned or even better than we planned. But there are those times in life when things do not turn out anywhere near the way that we expected. And many times it can throw us for a loop. And I want to discuss the fact today that it's not many times the actual events or the unfolding of life, but it's how we respond, we react, and we adapt to what has happened to us and how life has unfolded to us. And there's no better description of that than we find in Matthew chapter 11. In Matthew 11, the chapter opens up where John the Baptist is in prison in the fortress of Machaerus. John had been locked up for months because he had offended Herod Antipas. At the same time, Jesus' ministry now is well underway. He has been preaching and teaching in Galilee for quite some time and has made some jaunts into Judea. And John is starting to wonder about Jesus. When John baptized Jesus in the Jordan River, he saw the sign of the dove. He heard the voice, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." And on that day, John was pretty sure that he had baptized the person that he had been sent to preach about, to warn of, the Messiah. But as time grew on, and John spent month after month in prison, doubts began to arise in his mind concerning Jesus. You see, John had preached a message that the Messiah would bring blessing, but he would also bring judgment. And John so far had not seen, or at least heard, about any judgment going on. And so in the beginning of chapter 11, he sends some disciples to Jesus to find out, are you the one whom we're expecting, or should we wait for someone else? When the disciples asked Jesus this question, he said, I want you to go back to John. Tell him that people are healed, the blind see, the dead are raised. The good news is being preached to the poor. But here's the key line that he says. Blessed is the one who does not stumble because of me. So John's disciples leave now and head back. But as they leave, Jesus wants to share with the crowd his feelings about John's ministry and indeed his own ministry thus far. He tells them that up to that point, no one born of a woman was greater than the prophet John. That's a wonderful remark to make about John the Baptist. But then Jesus goes on to talk about the response to both the ministry of John and his own ministry. In that response, Jesus compares the crowds to children in the marketplace playing games as they wait for their parents to buy the produce and goods. And in these games, they would cry out, "We sang a dirge, but you didn't mourn. We wailed, you didn't mourn. We played the flute, but you didn't dance. In other words, John did not prove to be whom the people expected. And neither did Jesus for that case. Jesus would go on to say that in their critique of both John's ministries and his ministries, when they didn't measure up to what people expected, not only did they make satirical remarks, but then they began to accuse. Because John did not eat or look like anyone else, they said that he had a demon. And as for Jesus, they called him a glutton, a drunkard, and a friend of sinners and tax collectors. These were the reactions and the responses of many people when Jesus and John did not meet up to their expectations. You see, certain things happen to us when life does not turn out the way that we expect. First of all, there's doubts, just like John experienced as he was confined in the fortress of Machaerus. But then there can be more critical things happen to us. We can become bitter and very hard-hearted, as Jesus talked about the crowds and the masses' reactions and responses to the ministries. Then they can become accusatory. We know in Jesus' ministry how the Pharisees, Sadducees, and lawyers followed him and critiqued him and his followers at every junction about how they ate, about how they acted on Sabbath days, about Jesus' healings, even saying that he cast out spirits by the spirit of Beelzebub. These were all reactions of people because their expectations of the Messiah were not met in Jesus Christ, and their expectations of the messenger were not met in the ministry of John the Baptist. Many times in life, these become our human reactions. You and I go through the same things when life does not turn out the way that we expected. The last 4 years of my life have been totally different than what I ever thought that they would be. And in that time, because of a wife being taken away from me at a young age, I went through many of the things that I've expressed to you. You have doubts, you have fears, sometimes anger, sometimes just the loss of knowing what's going on in my life. We all go through that. And we have to realize that it's not the events that end up shaping us so much as how we respond to those events. It is our response and our reactions and our ability to adapt that will really determine where we end up in our lives. As believers, we believe Christ is in charge. And many times, when Christ unfolds his will or manifests himself, things don't turn out the way that we thought they would. And sometimes we can become bitter, we can have doubts, and we can even get hard-hearted. These people were so hard-hearted that Jesus says at one point that in their cities of Chorazin and Capernaum, Bethsaida, he said, if I had done in Sidon and Tyre the miracles that I performed in these towns, they would have repented and put on sackcloth. He'll go on to say that if the Queen of Sheba, who was amazed at Solomon's wisdom, the people of Nineveh who repented at the preaching of Jonah, he says, think about it. Someone greater than both Solomon and Jonah is here right now. Those people repented. And yet the people in the towns of Capernaum, Chorazin, and Bethsaida couldn't come to that realization. It's all about response and reaction and adaptation to what God has planned. Things in our life will never turn out exactly the way we had planned. But I go back to what Jesus said to John's followers. His last words were, "Blessed are those who do not stumble because of me." God's plans are not always the same as our plans. Sometimes they clash, and sometimes they can clash in a way that at the time doesn't seem favorable to us. But as believers, we know that God always has our best interests at heart. Today, my thought to you is the same as Jesus said to them. Let our reactions, our responses, and let's be willing to adapt to the plans and purposes of the Christ we serve. Not always will it turn out the way we expect, but ours is not to question God, but to simply prayerfully ask that His will be done. He gives us His Holy Spirit so that we can react, respond, and adapt in the proper ways. Blessed are those who do not stumble because of me. Have a good day, enjoy your coffee, and we'll see you next week.